Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'll just explain briefly the format of the meeting. Basically, after some initial procedures, the licensed officer will outline his report. Everybody will be then given chances to ask questions. If everybody could direct their questions through the chair, which is me. The applicant will present their case, again, questions. And at the end of it, without reading everything out, we'll retire to make a decision. If we can make a decision immediate and with it today, we definitely will. If we can't, we have 5 working days to do so. But you will be let know of the result. If I could just ask if everybody switches their phones to silent. If you are online, welcome. But if you could put your microphones to mute when not speaking and also turn off your cameras. I'd be grateful, just as a general request, to have brevity in any of your submissions and try not to avoid repetition. That would be great. My legal officer, Alex, will interject if she feels anybody is talking outside the remit, in other words, not something connected with the licensing objectives. Right. I think that's it. So we'll get started. I'll first ask if anybody's got any declarations of interest. No, online? No, good. And if we could introduce ourselves. So my name is Simon Carswell. I'm division member for Street on Somerset Council, and I'm also chair of the licensing committee and the subcommittee today. To my right.
Hello, I'm Councillor Conor Payne. I'm one of the members of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee and today's subcommittee, and I'd like to apologise for setting this back a little bit. Traffic was a little bit bad, so thank you.
Lance.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Lance Duddridge. I'm the Somerset Councillor for Bridgewater West, a member of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee, and a member of this subcommittee.
Thank you. And then I'll go round.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Kershaw-Moore. I'm one of the senior solicitors with Somerset Council, and it's my job today to keep the committee on task and to provide any legal advice.
Thank you. Phil.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Phil Wake. I am the Licensing and Business Support Officer here at Somerset Council and have been overseeing this application.
Thank you, Jack.
Good morning. My name is Jack Godley. I'm the licensing lead for Somerset Council.
Thank you, Claire.
So, morning, my name is Claire Dickens. So I work for the council in democratic services. We pull together meetings like this so that the councils can make decisions.
Debbie going to introduce herself, or is she just going to use it with her, Debbie?
I can't focus the camera on myself. I'm webcasting today. I'm Debbie Widows and I'm a Democratic Services Officer with Claire.
As there aren't, I thought there might be up to 40 people here. We will very quickly just go around and just ask for your name and where you're from. Okay, we'll start with this gentleman on the left.
So, Chair, is it okay if we pass the microphone down the row? Otherwise, the people at home won't be able to hear.
I'm Rex Eastman. I'm a resident of Farley Hungerford.
And I'm Barbie Lund. I'm a parish councillor for Norton St Philip and Farley Hungerford.
I'm Ian Stewart Fotheringham. I'm a resident of Farley Hungerford.
And I'm John Davidson, another resident of Farley Hungerford.
I'm Dr. Mike Smith. I'm a resident of Farley Hungerford.
Captain Simon Hill, resident of Farley Hungerford.
And Katrina Murfitt. I'm a resident of Farley Hungerford and also a councillor on the parish council.
Thank you all, and then we'll start with you gentlemen here.
Hi there, I'm Tarquin MacDonald, Chief Executive, Bath Rugby.
Matthew Phipps from TLT Solicitors. I'm here to present the application this morning.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Paul
Okay, thank you, everyone, and welcome again. We'll get straight on, I think. So I'll now go to the licensing officer who can briefly outline the report. Phil.
Thank you, Chair. An application was submitted for the grant of a premises licence by Bath Rugby Limited on the 25th of April 2023. The application can be found at Appendix 1. The plan can be found at Appendix 2, and proposed conditions from the operating schedule can be found at Appendix 3. The application is for the sale by retail of alcohol, the provision of regulated entertainment, and the provision of late night refreshment. The timings for the licensable activities applied for can be found below. Farley House is a Grade 2 listed 18th century country house standing on a 135-acre estate and is primarily used by Bath Rugby Club as their headquarters and an elite level training facility. The premises has undertaken a major refurbishment and the applicants are now looking to host weddings, private parties and corporate events. Farley Hungerford is a village within the parish of Norton St Philip in the Somerset Council area, 8 miles north of Frome. The licensable activities as applied for were for the supply of alcohol Sunday to Thursday starting at 10 a.m. and finishing at 11 p.m. Supply of alcohol on Fridays and Saturdays from 10 a.m. until 0100. Regulated entertainment Friday and Saturday 10 a.m. until 0100 hours. And late night refreshment Friday and Saturday 2300 hours 11 p.m. until 0100 hours. Reason for referral to a licensing subcommittee. A total of 34 representations were received that relate to all 4 of the licensing objectives. A site visit took place on the 12th of May. A licensing officer was present, along with 3 representatives of Bath Rugby, several local residents and 2 ward members. A second meeting between the applicant and the local residents took place on the 16th of May. No agreement was forthcoming from these meetings, therefore representations were submitted. These have been considered relevant and the matter is for the licensing subcommittee to determine. Relevant observations. Whilst there have been 34 representations made, several of them are of a similar nature, and an overview of these representations can be found at Appendix 39. There have been concerns/points raised in relation to planning, but these would be deemed not relevant, as planning and licensing act independently of each other. It is the responsibility of the premises to ensure that they are compliant with both licensing and planning conditions. No representations have been made by any responsible authority. A map showing the premises location and nearby properties that have made representations can be found at Appendix 40. Legal implications. The Live Music Act 2013 and the Legislative Reform Entertainment Licensing Order 2014. The live and recorded music is deregulated between 0800 and 2300 hours on premises authorised to sell alcohol on the premises, subject to a maximum audience of 500 persons. The licensing authority has the power to remove the exemptions, but only if and when it carries out a formal review of a premises licence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. I just make 2 points. One thing I missed, if people could refer to page numbers, it's an awfully big document today, but if you could refer to page numbers, that'd be great. And just to re-emphasise that licensing is separate from planning. And so if there's a breach of planning, that isn't considered today at the licensing here. We're only here to consider licensing objectives. So, Alex, do you want to just say something?
Thank you, Chair. This might be I did agree with the committee prior to this hearing that I would make a short statement on their behalf about what it is that they need to hear today in order to make a valid and lawful decision. We've all read the papers. We're aware there's a lot of issues that have been raised. The licensing committee has to make a decision as to whether or not this application promotes the 4 licensing objectives. Those licensing objectives are, as I'm sure you know, crime and disorder, public nuisance, public safety, and the protection of children from harm. But you also need to be aware of what those mean. Public safety means safety on the premises. It means it's primarily there to deal with matters like the capacity of any venue, the safety aspects of it, the fire safety, the electrics, and whether anybody actually going to those premises will be safe. It is not, and I cannot stress this enough, it is not connected to the safety of the public off the premises. So any matters relating to people on roads, whether driving or walking, cannot be considered as part of the licensing committee's determinations. They are, I'm afraid, simply not relevant. And I would ask, therefore, that those are not mentioned in any submissions made by yourselves to the persons today, because they cannot be given any weight in the decision. Equally, in terms of public nuisance is about public nuisance emanating from the premises or its immediate vicinity. So yes, we are talking primarily about noise. And it is fine, you know, that absolutely noise can be coming from the premises, from people using the premises, and from, you know, noise of traffic entering and leaving the premises. It does not include the state of the roads, the narrowness of the roads, the amount of traffic on the roads away from the property, the whether people know where they're going. Those are not matters which can be considered by the licensing authority in considering where the public nuisance is caused. Similarly, as the chair has already mentioned, matters relating to planning are for planning. It is for the applicants to ensure that anything they do complies with planning control. The fact that they might not have done is not relevant to this application. It's not one of the licensing objectives, and an application can't be turned down because it might not accord with the current planning application. And again, therefore, I would ask that all the representations made today bear that in mind and focus solely on the matters which the licensing subcommittee can determine. It will make the decision more robust and less likely to lose if challenged. And so we would ask for your forbearance in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I'll now ask for questions to the licensing officer. We'll start with members of the subcommittee. Connor, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Lance, do you have any questions for the licensing officer?
No questions at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lance. All parties present, anyone want to ask anything of the licensing officer?
So no, thank you very much.
Okay. No? Okay, great. Anybody online? Who's that? Adam Boyden's got his hand up. Is that a question for the licensing officer, Adam?
Hello. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, the question would be, what were the responses to the application from the Environment Protection team and Planning team and the others, internal consultees who did respond to the application, but you say there's no representations? What does that mean if they didn't make a representation, but they did make a response? And can you explain what those responses were, please?
Councillor Boyden, can you put your camera on? This is Debbie, please. Thanks.
Okay, so in regards to no representations, with the application, there is a 28-day consultation period for other persons or responsible authorities to make objections to or make representations to the application. No representations mean that the responsible authorities came back and they stated no objections, or that they did not respond within the 28-day consultation period time. The responses from planning were no objection, and environmental protection were also no objection, and public protection. Thank you.
Thank you.
So can I just clarify, is that the sum total of their responses, or did they elaborate on why that was? That these responses haven't been circulated, they haven't been reported, they have been hidden from public view at all times. Is this correct procedure?
It is standard process that if a responsible authority has not made an objection or representation, they would not be included. Their response would not be included within the report. Yes.
Thank you, Phil. Is that it, Adam, or did you ask?
I'm really not happy with this, and I don't think it's right to exclude responses from the council teams from any public view. I don't know why that is, and they've been hidden from public view. They've been hidden from the subcommittee. You don't know what they said. I've seen, obviously, planning enforcement responses which indicate that the planning team would have objected. And I don't know why that means. I know what you're going to say, Alex. I know what you're going to say.
We cannot talk about planning in this, and I'm not going to allow it, I'm afraid.
It's a response on the
cannot-
list
no,
of
no.
issues.
No,
There were 4
about planning.
internal teams which responded to the application, and they were one of them.
You
And they've been
cannot
hidden
talk
from
about planning
the
matters.
committee.
Anything from planning has not been included in the papers because it is not relevant.
The response from the
to
Environment
process.
Protection team is relevant, and it has been hidden from public view. That's not planning. So I'd like to object to that being hidden. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Right. If there's no more questions for the licensing officer, we will now move on to the applicant to present their case. And as I said before, brevity would be great. Yes, sorry.
May I ask, please, you said that there were no relevant representations from relevant public bodies. The Norton St Philip Parish Council did make a representation objecting, and so I just wanted to clarify that point. They may not be deemed a relevant body in terms of this, but they did make a relevant representation. Thanks.
Phil, do you just want to explain what a relevant body means and what exactly?
Yeah, so as part of the Licensing Act 2003, the responsible authorities are listed in that, and the parish council are not a part of that list. Chair, I have got the responses from Environment Protection. If you want me to read out the responses in relation to the and the planning department, do you want me to read those out? No,
you can from the environmental health, I think, Phil, but not planning.
Okay, so I've got here an email from Richard Keith Hill, who is the Environment Protection Officer for Somerset Council, saying that the noise management plan is excellent and will get his support at any hearing if he's required to attend. And the traffic plan appears to be satisfactory, although not his area of expertise.
Thank you. Did we have another question from? I can't see the name up there. Is it Adam again? Is it? Okay.
No, this is a question online from Robin Allen.
Go ahead, Robin.
I just wanted to ask a question of Phil Wake. In relation to the Environmental Health Officer's response, which was the noise management plan is excellent, etc. Do we know what information he was given when he gave that response? And if it was just the application states that regulated entertainment application will be indoors, and indoors means indoors, I understand, not in a marquee outside at 1 o'clock in the morning. Are you aware whether the Environmental Health Officer considered that response on the basis of indoors or on the basis of the applicant's intention to have regulated music outdoors at 1 o'clock in the morning on Fridays and Saturdays?
Phil. Yes, thank you. So yeah, the Environmental Protection have responded. The noise management plan was circulated as part of the additional information, which I believe has been served on everybody. And this is what Richard Keith Hill has responded to. And yes,
Thank you. Any more questions of the licensing officer at this moment?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the answer. My question related to whether the application is for regulated entertainment indoors, or does the licensing officer consider the application is for regulated entertainment on Fridays and Saturdays at 1 o'clock in the morning outdoors?
Phil?
Yes, the application was for indoors. And we have spoken with the Environment Protection Department, and they consider that the marquee would be outdoors. So the regulated entertainment would be indoors only as applied for.
So just to summarise, regulated entertainment indoors is indoors. Marquees are considered to be outdoors. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
So can I confirm, or can we confirm in this licensing committee that should a license be granted to Bath Rugby Farley House, and that includes the entertainment music aspect, they would not have a license under the jurisdiction of this committee to play any form of entertainment outside the physical buildings of Farley House, i.e. a marquee in the garden or indeed any other areas in their garden would be considered a breach of the conditions. Is that correct, assuming this was passed forward? Just so I understand correctly what is being said in this meeting.
Phil?
Yeah, so the plan of the premises is the entirety of the site, and with the Live Music Act exemption, which I touched on earlier at the introduction, because that does include the site, the deregulation would take effect between 10 a.m. when the start of the sale of alcohol begins, up until 11 p.m. So that could be within the grounds of the property. It's when it goes into the after 11 p.m. when the deregulation is, or the activities become regulated. That is when it is then a licensable activity, and that is when it is indoors only.
Okay, so if we understand correctly, what potentially could happen is that live music could be played outside anywhere on the grounds up until 11 p.m. at night, and only after 11 p.m. could music be moved inside to the physical brick walls of the property. Is that correct?
Yes, correct, yes.
Understood.
Thank you.
Forgive me, sir, do you mind if I ask a question? Because candidly, that is news to us. I've no idea where that has come from, the suggestion that the marquee would be outdoors. It respectfully, self-evidently wouldn't be outdoors. It would be in the marquee. And I know that the environmental health officer effectively, to all intents and purposes, asked that question. And we went back to them and engaged with them to specifically explain what was proposed. So I'm sorry to say, that's the first I've heard of that.
Phil?
Chair, I'll take that question. The marquee is deemed by Environmental Protection to be acoustically transparent, and therefore it's classed as outdoors.
Thank you. And I would also add that the Environmental Protection team are not, they shouldn't really be involved in the day-to-day correspondence to do with the application. Right. Okay, there can be things the applicant wants to discuss, but I think it's quite clear that marquee is considered to be outside. Thank you.
So forgive me again, but as I say, that is the first we've heard of it. All the residents will be alive to the significance of that on the application. If we are, as we are, seeking to obtain a license for events at a facility, which is going to include a marquee facility, candidly, it seems extraordinary that the first suggestion that the application for the marquee terminates at 11 p.m. to all intents and purposes is 20 minutes into the licensing hearing when we made the application 2 months ago. We've certainly, I don't echo Councillor Boyden's observations about the materials being hidden, but it is certainly not something that we have seen at all. And candidly, I'm at a loss to understand whatever the acoustic transmissibility of the fabric might be. I cannot, I'm afraid, for the life of me, see how anybody could interpret within a marquee as being outdoors.
Jack?
I'd say I've taken advice from Environmental Protection, and that is their standing.
Can I just ask, is that standard for licensing in general, that a marquee is considered to be outside?
Yes, it is.
Sorry, just to be clear, I wouldn't accept that. I'm sorry to be getting off on the wrong foot on this application, but people live in tents. We don't say they live outside. I'm sorry, but I don't know where the suggestion that within a marquee is outside, but I'm afraid it's new to me.
Chair?
Yeah.
Sorry, I appreciate people have questions. I think we might need to get an environmental protection officer in. Phil, is there one available this morning? Yeah.
Yeah,
I think,
we'll do that.
that's the way this is going.
Adjourn
Yeah.
for 5 minutes just while we do that.
Thank you.
Ray, what's useful to do? It's just out there. Okay, thank you. Just to let everybody know, the environmental health officer is on their way from the festival site. There's two ways of going here. We can either continue and then refer back once the officer arrives, but that would have to be with the consent of the applicant, or we can wait for them to arrive before we continue. Entirely up to you. You can give your case or you can wait.
So thank you. It's a tiny point, but on the procedure, I think it's for the representatives actually to give their representation. But respectfully, I can't see how we can go ahead on the basis that none of us are certain here what it is that is now being said that we've applied for or not. To be fair to the representatives, it's unclear as to what they're specifically now objecting to because of this. And so I'm sorry, but I think we've got to wait and then make a determination. Could I just add this one point, if I may, though, that it's going to boil down to effectively the authority's determination of what the word indoor means. I understand that the environmental health officer may have a contribution, but the acoustic treatment or otherwise doesn't seem to me actually, for what it's worth, that relevant. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying that we shouldn't wait for them to come along, but it's the word indoors and how you consider that is the point. And I mean, we'll make submissions on that in due course, so I'm not wanting to get ahead of myself, but we'll all be thinking, well, what if, all the way through the hearing if we proceed now?
Okay, thank you. Somebody said to me, I don't know whether it's the case, did you want to see, I'm leading you here a bit, but about the correspondence between environmental health?
Just when Jack said that he's had confirmation that the officers treating indoors as being properties that are not sufficiently, in his determination, acoustically treated, I'd like to see that, obviously.
Thank you. Jack, is that possible? Hopefully it is.
Yes, that will be environmental protection. Once they arrive, they'll give that.
What I'd like to see is the dialogue and the confirmation before today that allowed Jack to be able to inform you that that's the assessment the authority are making.
That was a verbal conversation we had.
Okay, so I'm afraid we're going to wait. I think, yes, sir.
Could I just possibly make a point in reference to what's been said in the last few minutes and just before we broke up from the applicant, seeming to be utterly surprised that people might consider marquees as outdoor. I should just refer, well, I can tell you that at least 34 people in Farley Hungerford are not surprised at all by that, but can I just refer you to the applicant's document in their late submission, Appendix 5A, page 14, which is the noise management plan. And in the noise management plan, there's a table, and the table lays out in the first section inside music, and their words and their heading in the second section says outside brackets marquee music.
So can I, sorry, I'm worried we're getting back into the meat of the application. At the moment, we're just trying to determine whether we wait for the Environmental Protection Officer or continue right now. I fully appreciate you might want to say that as part of your submissions, and we will get to that, but I don't want to sort of get all jumbled up. Does that make sense?
Not really, because I was just following on from a comment where the applicant was surprised and denied all knowledge that a marquee may be outdoors, whereas in their submission they have called it outside.
Yeah.
The surprise was the first I heard of this definition of indoors was this morning when Jack explained it.
If you called it yourself.
No, forgive me, sir.
Can we leave this until we get to the meeting and we'll wait for the environmental health officer? Thank you.
So.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. We've now got Richard Keith Hill, Environmental Health Officer, with us. So I think the easiest way to do this is if somebody wants to ask a question of Richard, and then we'll proceed from there. Do you wish to?
I mean, I don't want to jump in where your legal officer may have led, but I suppose, so where are you, Rich? Sorry, Richard. Is the local authority's legal definition of indoors excluding premises that are not deemed by the authority to be strongly acoustically treated?
Well, there is no legal definition of indoors or outdoors within our legislation. But what we consider as marquees are acoustically transparent. And therefore they don't have the acoustic qualities of a building. You can't keep doors and windows shut the way you can in a building. So
forgive me, I fully accept that. And by extension, the music played in a marquee must be more carefully considered, controlled, and in reality, the levels diminished against a property, let's say a basement bunker that were 300 yards underground. I entirely accept all of that. That's not the point. The point here is, has the authority taken a view, not as far as I can see published in their policy, that when someone makes an application for entertainment indoors, the application is invalid if that relates to a marquee?
not from an environmental health point of view, no.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
Anybody else have a question of the Environmental Health Officer? As we dragged him back from the Glastonbury site, he's going to be thinking, is that it? Anybody else? Yeah, Phil. Okay, Councillor Adam Boyden.
Councillor Boyden, please put your camera on.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to ask the Environmental Protection Officer for any other views he may have on the application as it stands, as he's been informed about it. And also, is there any impact assessment on the noise levels that he's aware of? Because I haven't seen any to determine the likely noise levels at residences as a result of late night music.
No, we haven't had a noise impact assessment made of it. But I was perfectly happy with the noise management plan as it stands, even with the marquee being used. So that's the only other thing I can really say.
Thank you. Oh, is that it, Adam? Yeah. Somebody else? Yes, sir.
Sorry, for the Environmental Health Officer, I just want to clarify what you just said. So you are saying that the statement which was read out earlier in the meeting from you, which indicated that you thought that the noise management plan was excellent and well thought out, would apply to the playing of live or recorded music at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday or a Saturday night. Could you just confirm that that is your view?
I don't recall the timings of it, but yes, that is my view.
Well, I'll just remind you of the timings. They've applied for regulated activities after 11 o'clock on a Friday and a Saturday throughout the year.
Okay, yeah, that is my view. Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with the noise management plan as it stands.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, could I ask, please? I noticed in the noise management plan that they produced most recently in Supplement 4 that it made no mention of a specific decibel limit. It did mention that there would be an appointed person who was telling them when they thought they'd reached the limit. But if that was a self-appointed person, essentially they're self-policing what they think is appropriate. And if they are financially incentivized, as they would be, to be keeping their paying customers happy, they would probably be very likely to prioritize that over the needs of considering the needs of the locality. And therefore, is it appropriate for them to be self-policing if they have no means of really reasonably being considered impartial in setting an upper decibel limit? There is no upper decibel limit in their plan. And if it's outdoors, essentially, there's all this indoors, outdoor stuff. If they have a speaker in a marquee, which is acoustically transparent, as you say, outdoors, blaring in the garden, 270 metres away from our house, I'm not sure that are they the appropriate people to be setting a limit, and they haven't said what it's going to be, and they could put a, you know, choose on any given moment with their current plan how much they think is too much. If they say, do you know what, go on, crank it up a bit, then what's going to happen?
Okay, well, I feel that given the noise management plan that they've submitted, if they did that, they would be breaching that noise management plan. They have made promises in that they will need to stick to, because that will be part of their license. Now, any of this does not preclude us from taking action under our legislation for noise nuisance. So if they have, and it's one of the things that I suggested to them, why don't you put in for a 10 first and see how it goes and see what we get? I haven't done that. They've gone for the license. That's fine. But we could still take action under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act or the Environmental Protection Act for noise nuisance if they don't stick to their plan and if it causes a nuisance to you. So if we have one event and it causes a nuisance, we will then be all over it on the next event doing noise monitoring to make sure that they stick to what they said in their noise management plan. So I assure you we will be there if it causes a problem.
Thank you. That's very reassuring to know. Would it be appropriate, nevertheless, to also include here and now a decibel limit of what
I could not do that without there being.
Limit,
I could not do that without there being a noise assessment of the site,
which they didn't make prior to any of this application.
I didn't request
in any way, shape, or form. Okay.
I didn't request that they did that. I didn't feel it was necessary in this
Fair
instance.
And of course, a review of the licence can be requested at any time. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm just struggling a little bit with this, I'm afraid, because I'm pretty sure that the application states they are applying for music indoors. That is what the application says. What you seem to be saying is that even if they do it outdoors, that's okay.
Well, I felt that the noise management plan was acceptable for music indoors and outdoors. That's what I asked them to do, to cover themselves for outdoors. They've done that. I find that acceptable. I'm not, can't make any comment on the legal definition of the indoors outdoors thing. They didn't apply for outdoors. That's up for others to argue that point. Well, all I can say is I feel that the noise management plan is acceptable for music indoors and outdoors.
Can I just follow back on that? So it would be for, obviously, the licensing committee to say when the applicant says indoors, do they not make any attempt to define indoors being indoors, which is what most of us would do, and that it could easily include outdoor anywhere?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It is for the licensing committee to determine, and I will ensure that included in the decision is an explanation of what we mean by indoors. Having said that, I don't think anybody would expect a licensing committee to take indoors to mean anywhere outside.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, and just because there's been a huge amount of back and forth and, just trying to keep track so that we can properly represent. Are we right in understanding that what the applicant has applied for within the broader context of their license application pertaining to live music or live noise, for a better word, is for indoor between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. And that is not inclusive of being in a marquee. Is that correct?
Can I suggest that we deal with that when we deal with the applicant's submission? At the moment, all you've heard is a summary from the licensing officer of what they believe the applicant's application to be. The best person to tell you what the applicant's application is the applicant.
Understood.
Through you, could I actually, though, give you a straight answer to a straight question? Because it's a fair point. There is no application for entertainment to be permitted outdoors. I appreciate we can go back and forth about the marquee, but outside of the marquee and the house, nothing. We can cut through this on that. The discussion point from my perspective, if you will, was seemingly the suggestion that the marquee wasn't included. There's no attempt to have entertainment other than in those locations.
Understood. Am I right?
Can we I know I encourage more dialogue, which was a mistake perhaps, but can we bring this to a close? as regards the environmental health officer, and then we can move on to the applicant. But yes, one more question.
Sorry, I'm still not clear there. Are we clear, therefore, that when the application is made around indoors, because you're right, let's discuss what they're applying for, but when they say indoors, that would not include a marquee, is that correct?
I think it's fair to say from what we've just heard, no, that's not correct.
So indoors
But
could
I will-
include a marquee?
I will let the applicants make their submission on that.
It's not a question about their submission. The question is, no, it's not a question about their submission with respect. The question is when the council are assessing the word indoors, and that's what's in the submission, as we understand it, the council will treat that as indoors, i.e. not a marquee. Is that correct?
I can't answer that yet because we haven't made the decision.
So what you're saying is you will actually make a decision as to what you count as indoors as part of this application?
Correct.
Understood.
Well, I one more question. Yes, sir.
To the Environment Officer, I understand from enforcement officers that in fact, if you were to use their monitoring equipment, whether it be in the centre of a marquee or against the wall of a marquee, and then you take that equipment and you put it outside of the marquee, the readings will be one of the same.
I can't really comment. It depends on the structure of the marquee itself. But we would consider it acoustically transparent, but obviously some can be more substantial than others. It's impossible to say without seeing the marquee itself. Yes, there will be a degree of acoustic attenuation with a marquee, but not the same as a solid building in any way, shape or form. It's problems that we've had at many, many events.
Right, I want to move the meeting forward. Thank you, Richard, for coming back from the festival. There is, who's the question online? I can't see. No.
Robin and Deborah.
Robin and Deborah, did you have another question or was that a legacy hand?
Excuse me, that was a legacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Richard. I'll let you get back to the site. Thank you. Wrong way. We'll move on now to the applicant to present their case. Thank you.
So thank you. This is an application, as you have seen from the materials, and I understand a visit to the location about a proposed event space, both in Farley House and in a marquee within the Farley House grounds. And there are plans within the premises that, again, you will have seen that follow the officer's report. I didn't miss the fact that you wanted reference to page numbers. It's page 3345. Sorry. That's right.
Sorry, carry on.
Not at all. The plans are following your agenda, page 33 onwards, and they effectively disclose the grounds as well as the detail of the buildings. Before we turn to the detail of the application, I'd just like to flag, if I may, some of the points that this morning, very nearly this afternoon's hearing is not about. You and your legal advisor have touched on planning issues. I'm not proposing to address you on that at all, but of course I'm happy to if that were an issue. But nor is it about every conceivable risk. If it were about every conceivable risk, candidly, it's difficult to understand which license applications for pubs, bars, nightclubs, restaurants, festivals, or anything would ever be granted, and frankly, wouldn't need to be closed down. And it is not about assuming worst case impacts. And that is what I say these representations disclose, is they disclose a worst plausible, potential, possible case. And of course, you don't need to take my word for that. you can see from Councillor Boyden's representation the specific sentence, therefore residents have made representations based on their lived experiences with the club's activities at Farley and have assumed worst case impacts. And their reference throughout the representations, particularly Councillor Boyden's, to potential. There is nothing particularly unusual here, we say. There are dozens, perhaps hundreds, of houses of significance throughout England and Wales that have similar facilities and licences. But I entirely accept that that does not mean that this application could or should be granted simply because of the existence of other properties of a similar description. Each application has to be considered on its individual merits, and you will be only too familiar with your policy and the national guidance that make that point candidly repeatedly throughout those significant documents. But it's also right that the mere operational conduct of licensable activities cannot fairly be presumed to generate an undermining of the licensing objectives. And that does seem to me what the representations seek to persuade you, that the conduct of activities here is bound inexorably to lead to issues. And we simply don't accept that at all. There are references, as you're aware, to public nuisance, and predominantly that is about noise arising from entertainment. I've noted your legal officer's observations about traffic and transport, which I'll touch on, but I sort of think that that's probably, I think the steer is to perhaps leave that slightly to one side. But what do we know just about noise? And so it is proposed that there will be entertainment on Fridays and Saturdays beyond 11 p.m. And you will have seen our noise management plan. And we're happy to take, obviously, questions on that. And I'm going to take you through it just in a moment. But what we know from both what was said by Phil, your licensing officer, and then indeed by Richard when he attended, is that he thinks it's excellent and will get my support if I'm required to attend. He also says, in answer to questions from the residents, that he did not consider that an acoustic report was necessary or proportionate, and appropriate and proportionate are key watchwords in licensing with which you'll be familiar. He chose not to serve a representation. He, as you'll be aware from our written submissions, which I'll touch on in a moment, is effectively an expert in these deliberations. And he says that the noise management plan, in real terms, attends to all of the issues that he considers to be material. We say that that is compelling. There's some reference as well to light pollution. And I think there's some reference to floodlights. There's no question of floodlights here. We're talking about the lighting of a marquee on effectively the lawns within the estate. We don't accept that that could possibly fairly be said to generate light pollution that could be categorized as public nuisance. And it is important to say that the licensing objective with which we are concerned here is public nuisance. It is not any change whatsoever to the existing position. It's also touched on that crime and disorder or antisocial behaviour will likely arise as a result of this licence being granted. I'm afraid we simply don't accept that that is a fair and considered response to what's proposed. And candidly, nor do the police. They've not served a representation. They are specifically articulated within paragraph 912 of the guidance as being your experts in this field. And in addition to which, you will have seen reference in the conditions and indeed in the noise management plan, and for what it's worth in the traffic management plan, to monitoring, supervision and so forth of customers' arrivals, departures, and so forth. There's then reference to public safety. And again, your legal officer was good enough to give a steer on that in her opening remarks. It's paragraph 2.7 of the national guidance. It is about the safety of the attendees at the premises itself. A number of the points that are raised that touch on issues of safety are effectively about the national road network. And again, I take your legal advisor's steer that there's no need to address you on that, but if you've got questions on that, then of course happy to speak to that. But there is a traffic management plan contained within the paperwork. I think the phrase from Environmental Health appears to be satisfactory, but not their area of expertise. You'll see that there's points of delivery, points of stewarding, points of parking that are all touched on in that. And then when we come to the various documents, they are contained within the supplementary agendas. There is some material produced, effectively a presenter, if I can call it that, which I think starts at page 5, page 6 of the second supplementary agenda. I'm not planning on taking you through that line by line. There are some photographs also contained within the supplementary materials. In that presenter, predominantly the internals for the building, but then in the material just preceding that, there's some photographs of Farley House, the grounds, the proposed location, the entrances, the exits, the driveways, and so forth. There's additionally some material, I don't need to take you through it in detail, just about the dialogue. I appreciate it may be your view that it doesn't really attend to the issue of the licensing objectives, but we can see that residents are unhappy with the degree of dialogue that went on, particularly perhaps before the application was submitted, to be fair. And we've just sought to incorporate some of the materials. There's been site visits which your licensing officer effectively managed and attended with residents, and there's been ongoing emails and dialogues. Appreciate we are either sides of the fence today, but it's fair to say that Paul has an extensive dialogue with a number of local residents, and we are very much engaged in a discussion. We're having to agree to disagree today. And then there is the protection of children from harm objective. You will have seen that there are a couple of representations from a 7 and a 10-year-old within the representation. And there are, and that's page 165 and, forgive me, 167. But preceding that at 123, photograph of children on scooters on the National Road Network outside Farley Cottage. I'm afraid that is not the licensing objective of the protection of children from harm, and the points that are made about public safety probably apply, and it's about activities conducted on the premises. And I think there's some reference on page 122 to, and it's touched on in other representations, inviting the committee to effectively extend the remit of licensing objectives and to effectively ignore the national guidance to extend the remit of what the objectives mean. Don't think it's unreasonable for the council as Highways Authority to take this into account. Bluntly and courteously, we do think that's unreasonable, improper. The national guidance has to be taken into account by the authority, and if not, if you choose to depart from it, which of course you may, it's any guidance, then reasons need to be given. It would be respectfully an extraordinary decision to decide to extend the remit of the protection of children from harm or public safety objectives in that way. But what we think that those representations, both the service from a 7 and 10-year-old, but also the photographs and some of the language used within the representation, do disclose a sensitivity that is respectfully disproportionate to the application that has been made and the actual risks that this application will likely generate. I've made the point about all licensed premises carrying risk. I won't repeat myself. One of the phrases I think used in the representation, I'll turn to the page in a moment, is that it is not inconceivable that, and then a number of matters are referenced as possibly likely occurring or possibly occurring. That too is neither close nor legitimately close to a fair determination, a balanced, proportionate, reasonable determination as to what will likely happen here. And not inconceivable is, I'd suggest, a window into the sensitivity of the representations here. We ask you to look at the conditions that have been proposed on this application, conditions from memory that were circulated to the responsible authorities in advance of the submission of the application. And they're on page 37, 8 and 9. And then, if I may, just turn you toward the supplementary 3, the written submissions that we have provided. I hope everyone will be relieved to know I'm not planning on taking you through those written submissions either line by line or word for word, but the page 11 of that supplementary does touch on additional proposed conditions with limits on the number of events this year and next. No activities Mondays, Tuesdays, no activities Boxing Day, licensable activities to now be restricted to midnight with all off the premises at 1, noise management plan, traffic management plan, deliveries, recycling, refuse, routing, litter patrols, and so forth. And as your environmental health officer has flagged, the noise management plan and traffic management plan would effectively be conditions on the license. The thought did strike me, I'm bound to say this morning, that in order to offer some comfort to residents on that, you as a committee may want to give consideration to words to the effect of not to be changed without the authority's express permission, or words to that effect. From the smile on your legal officer's face, I suspect she's ahead of me on that and already thought exactly the same point, and I'm glad we're in agreement on that. But what we do say is that that is a perfectly legitimate and proportionate suite of conditions, and you will have seen many licenses over the years for an event space of this sort. Some of the representations effectively invite the conclusion that what is perceived as the tranquility and quiet that some enjoy in what's a rural location, no challenge to that at all, it needs and should be protected. But that is, we say, to change the legal test. The legal test is public nuisance. We are in a quieter location. We will have to conduct our activities accordingly and sensitively. But the protection of tranquility is not the licensing objective. And again, it's in the written submissions. I would ask you to give consideration to who appears in front of you as applicant. There is a reputational point that is bluntly described as we cannot do anything that is going to be egregious. There seems to be some sense that we are wanting to, and in the questions earlier about how you're self-policing it, and in some way that undermines the policing of the noise monitoring. apart from the fact that's probably true of 99.9% of licensed premises of this size and dimension throughout the country, and you heard from the officer about the various environmental protections, and you yourself, sir, touched on the issue of review, there is that second lockstep that for good or ill, we are Bath Rugby Club. We have to conduct ourselves properly. We're not some cowboy nightclub operator. And I'd ask you to bear that in mind. I'd also ask you to look at the application, the dialogue, the materials that have been produced, the response from officers, and when you come to retire, ask yourself whether we have acted reasonably, proportionately, sensibly and fairly. And we say unashamedly to you that we have. We say unashamedly that you can trust us to do this properly. And of course, you have all the various protections that if we don't, then action can be taken. I'm going to just touch on the issue of this indoor-outdoor point, because I appreciate that it's likely to be a point of determination. But candidly, having heard from the environmental health officer, I'm treating the point as pretty much over, candidly. The first question is the application a legitimate application to allow activities of an entertainment nature to take place in the marquee? And the only legitimate answer to that is yes, and the officer effectively confirmed as much. What he then went on, and if that's not accepted, then let me just make an observation then about that. The Health Act prohibited smoking indoors. If you smoke in a marquee, you're breaking the law because you're indoors. It would be frankly extraordinary for this authority to bring into, hitherto unannounced, I might add respectfully, and from my understanding of my conversation with Jack, the conversation with Environmental Health was not actually about this application. It was a different application that he once spoke to them about. The point that isn't missed, though, and the point that's fair to make, and we've always accepted, that the acoustic treatment of marquees is, as the officer indicated, variable. It's unlikely to be as good as a 250-year-old building, and that's a perfectly legitimate point. And that means that we need to conduct the activities within the marquee differently, more sensitively, and I suppose in simple terms, less loudly, certainly less loudly at nearby residential properties. The more acoustic treatment that we invest in, the louder it can be in the marquee. It doesn't matter what the volume is in the marquee, it's where it impacts residents so that it does not cause a public nuisance. But it is, I say, extremely telling that the officer himself, who has expressly approved the noise management plan, did so and confirmed to you today whether the entertainment was indoors or outdoors, which actually is an endorsement and affirmation of the legitimacy of the noise management plan. It doesn't change what the application is. We have not applied for outdoors. And so entertainment will not be permitted on a lawn, but it will be permitted within a marquee. And the noise management plan, supplementary to, again, without going through it line by line, but you will see that the top of the document is a relatively modest 3 paragraphs about management of the noise indoors. And then there's the best part of 2/3, 3/4 of a page of A4 on the marquee area, which is not undermined by it saying outside in any way. That, frankly, we are sensitive to the issues of the PA system, walking the boundary, further checks being undertaken, additional checks being taken, so as to ensure that it is played at a level that is appropriate and does not unreasonably intrude, only goes to the observations of the officer that he made about him being extremely satisfied with it. But it doesn't stop there. It does touch on deliveries, smoking, refuse and recycling, and then it goes to a direct telephone number being provided to residents and neighbours such that they can contact the premises and then an action plan if complaints are received, and then that all being recorded. And you can see that at page 15 of that part. We say that that is a perfectly legitimate noise management plan. That the transport and traffic, I'll not take you through at the same level of detail. I've seen some figures for the volume of vehicles that some of the residents anticipate with event activities, perhaps permitting up to 200 persons. I'd ask you to look fairly carefully at those numbers. That there will be some additional traffic as a result of this application, obviously. That's obviously the case. It would be a nonsense for me to suggest otherwise. I'm afraid the mere existence of additional traffic does not generate a public nuisance licensing objective concern. But we do need to manage the traffic and transport properly. We need to do our best, and we need to set that out, which we have done, and that's page 16. And you will see reference to stewards, signage, what 3 words being effectively a GPS program that will take people a certain way and which way they will go. And it may be suggested, well, you can't stop someone turning left if you're directing them right, and I accept we can't. But we will do our best. We will do everything that we can to minimize all of this. But if someone were to turn left, that doesn't undermine the licensing objectives. That's just a car turning left. And I would ask that you bring that sense of proportionality to this all the way through. The additional point that I would like to have made, and I make it at the end of my submissions. Actually, in your procedure, I'd anticipated that this would have been a preliminary point, but I think in the concerns about indoor and outdoor, it probably got lost. But you will see in the conditions that we've proposed that we propose no more than 15 events this year and no more than 50 next. And what we are happy to say is that we will take a limit for 2025 onwards of no more than 80 events a year. And of those, no more than 50% will permit a capacity of 100 persons or more. The point that goes to, which is perhaps a point on which to conclude my comments, is that this application, from our perspective, is about targets, not limits. That we are allowed to have 80 events does not mean we will have 80 events. That we have a capacity of 200 persons does not mean that every event will be for 200. It legally, technically could be, I accept that. But that simply isn't reality. Every pub in the country that operates until 11 p.m. can have live music 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They don't. It's just not reality. And I would ask you, as a final observation, to just step back from perhaps some of the more inflammatory interpretations of the application and just look at what is in reality proposed. And we say, with the additional conditions, effectively with the endorsement of the officers and the express and specific commentary that you've heard today, it's a good application. And much as I hate to say it, if we cock it up, then I'm sure it won't be the last that any of us will have heard of it. But we are a legitimate applicant, and we invite you to grant the application.
Thank you very much for that submission. I will go to members of the subcommittee first with any questions, and I will open it up to the wider audience. Connor, do you have any questions?
Yes, let me pick up my pen. Right, okay. I've just got a couple because I'm still a little bit confused myself on what's going on, but I'm sure it will be clarified. To confirm, to your knowledge, you've applied in this licence to play live and recorded music until 1 a.m. indoors.
Yes, in our submissions, we've cut that back to midnight, actually, but the original application was 1 a.m. with a 30-minute drinking up time, but we, in the written submissions, said we'll drop that to 12:30 with everyone off the premises by 1.
Okay, thank you. So far as my knowledge goes, in terms of what considering indoors and outdoors is when it comes to a marquee, is that it's 50% of the sidings to be attached at a minimum. That's my knowledge of.
That's the smoking legislation, but yes, I agree.
Yes, yes. So is it in the plan to have more than 50% of the sides attached?
It's not in the plan to have anything other than all of the sides attached.
Okay, all right. Is the marquee isn't up, is it? No, it isn't. Not at the moment. That's fine. Do you intend for the marquee to be up more than 28 days of the year?
Not so far as I'm aware, but possibly. The planning point, which I suspect that this attends to, I mean, obviously I see the look your legal officer is giving you. I don't.
Can we not go down the planning route, please,
Yes, that's fine.
Councillor? Thank you.
Can I deal with, if I may, planning in this way? We will be compliant with our planning. We believe we are, others believe we're not. But that's for planning. That's the point of all of this discussion.
That was what I wanted to get onto, basically, is to say that in this instance, as it then goes into planning, it is not for the subcommittee to attend to. Oh, sorry, yeah.
No, it isn't.
No,
I do not want discussions about planning.
that's fine. That's
Thank
what I'm
you.
trying to attend to. I'm trying to say that therefore it is not for us to be involved in
Do not think
at all.
about planning at all.
No, quite.
And I appreciate I may now have a similar look, but I'll make this brief point. We are not here at any part of this suggesting we are proposing to breach our planning. We don't care about planning. All my submissions intended to say was this is a licensing hearing, not a planning.
Yes, yeah.
And it appears that the annual policy and the national guidance and the advice you've received this morning respectfully says exactly the same.
So my questions were merely the clarification, because I wanted to know that this doesn't go on to that. And so we are in licensing. It is a licensing hearing. Yes, so the marquee as it stands is not something for us to discuss. So that is out of it. And we are looking at the licensing objectives and how that meets it. So yeah, thank you. That's my question.
Thank you, Connor. Lance, do you have any questions?
No, not at this time, Chair. I think everything's been covered so far that I would like to ask about. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. I did have 2 questions, but you answered them towards the end of your submission, so I'm not going to ask any more. Alex, do you have anything?
Yeah, just a couple of points of clarification, Ms. Phipps. I think you said, yes, your clients are amending their application to reduce the terminal hour for all licensable activities to 12:30 on Fridays and Saturdays, isn't it? Yeah. Is that correct, isn't it?
That's page.
As in, yeah, on page 11. Yeah.
And just for everybody's benefit, the reason.
Thank you. And I think also, again, just to clarify, your clients again are offering a further condition of restricting activities in 2025 to 80, was it? And forever. So it's for as long as they have the license.
Yeah. Just in page 11 again says 15 this year, 50. And we would provide consideration given the further condition that says 80. And of those, no more than.
Okay.
And that effectively goes to, I hope, concern and this. There will be event activity at Farnham, as an example, where you might have, let's say, 20 people come, perhaps on a rugby. Arriving at 12, leaving at 5 in the evening with 20 attendees. That was trying to, if you will, offer some comfort that we are not seeking hundreds of activities till 1 in the morning for a capacity of 200, nor were we ever. I appreciate it was interpreted in that way, and That's where we are, but that's the point that that's trying to attend to.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Councillor Chair.
Thank you. I'll open it up to the wider audience. Yes, sir.
So at the start of the applicant's words just now, he mentioned that its character and conduct are not important considerations here because they're not part of the licensing objectives. I'd just like to clarify that in the applicant's written submission in supplement number 4 from a few days ago that was submitted, if you turn to the final page of that, you'll see that he lists a number of things which he says are crucial, and I quote. And the very first thing he speaks about, and I don't have it in front of me, so I can't remember if it's the word character or conduct, but it's something that he claims to be crucial. So which is it?
If I said that it wasn't a consideration, I don't believe I did. But if I did, that was just wrong. It is a consideration. It's in the written submissions. I thought that I had specifically gone to the point about reputation, Bath Rugby, etc. So if I said the word "not" in front of that sentence, then apologies and thank you for the correction.
Yes, I would use your names, but
Too many options.
Mike Smith. Yes, I'd like to just raise three very brief points, if I may, just from what we've heard. Firstly, the applicant has criticised quite a lot of the submissions in using rather loose language, terms like potentially and so on. But in your noise management plan, in those 3 paragraphs on page 14 of your appendix 5A, the first paragraph says, we acknowledge we have responsibility to ensure our premises do not generate unreasonable noise disturbance. Nowhere is that defined, and I don't know whether you can define it.
Yes, so first of all, the point about the criticism, sir, is this, that the representations raise what I think the word was conceivable or potential or worst case scenario type issues. And my point to the committee is that that is able to be raised against every licensed premises. And if that were effectively a veto that would prohibit any application anywhere in the country being granted. So that's issue 1. Issue 2 is about unreasonable. We have to ensure that we do not cause a public nuisance. And a public nuisance is not particularly well defined within the licensing legislation. And so ensuring that we do not act unreasonably is considered in licensing terms, I'd suggest, perfectly legitimate. It's all a little bit subjective. It's all a little bit objective. But there is no technical answer to the question. There is nothing wrong with the word unreasonable in that document.
Well, okay, but I beg to differ because
but it's a question, so I give you an answer.
Someone's young child who's woken up at 1 o'clock in the morning might be deemed unreasonable by.
That may very well. That might be, sir. I entirely accept.
The second point.
Sorry, just the answer to the question. If we're waking people up at all hours of the day and night, then that would very likely be deemed to be unreasonable. And that's what the licensing officer effectively said. In receipt of complaints, they'll do monitoring and they'll come to a determination. This application is not seeking to permit us to wake people up at 3 in the morning or 1 in the morning for that matter. That's not what this application is about.
But you're not giving us any reassurances that you might not do that.
Respectfully, on that, we'll have to disagree.
Yeah.
We have given ample.
Okay.
And there are numerous confirmations from officers and within the papers about that, I'm afraid.
The second question perhaps is just to go back to the section about the sort of self-imposed conditions that they're proposing. I can't remember the number of the page now with reducing the hours and so on. Can I just establish quite clearly that if they are asking you to impose those conditions on them, which
they have submitted that they're willing to reduce the hours till 12:30. So yes, so we would take that into account.
Right,
we would do that. Yes,
you would do that. You could do that. You would do that, hopefully, and that therefore they would be enforceable.
So yes,
correct.
They are offered specifically. No, it's questions of that. They are offered to be specifically attached to any license if the committee sees fit to grant. And if they are attached as conditions, as we have expressly invited the committee to do, then breach of them is effectively a criminal offence.
My final small point is, I'm afraid, it is addressed to you, and it's I'll this isn't meant to be derogatory, but your analogy with smoking is not a good one. It was an appalling one. I happen to be a retired respiratory physician, and the rules are about passive smoking in contained spaces. The dispersal of something like cigarette smoke is totally different from noise.
No.
Totally.
Forgive me. Then the analogy was misunderstood. The analogy was this. We were talking about what is indoors and what is outdoors. Smoking is prohibited indoors. And the suggestion was we had not applied for entertainment indoors because it was in a marquee. If one smoked in a marquee, one would be breaking the law. And by extension, the definition of when you're breaking the law by smoking is when you're smoking indoors. And by extension, a marquee must, as night follows day, therefore be indoors. It was not about, it was no derogatory comment about it.
Just don't want us to be.
No, I know. I
competitive and-
completely disagree with that logic, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Barbie, I do know your name.
Thank you, Simon. I've just got two questions, and I apologise if the first one was already answered, but I did understand that there was no upper decibel limit in the, and is there a reason for that, and could that not be amended as a reassurance?
No, very much as the environmental health officer said, he didn't consider that that was necessary or proportionate for the application that we've put, and that the noise management plan adequately attends to all noise concerns.
Okay, I think my underlying assumption or sort of tone is one of it might really reassure residents should there be that in place. So it's a suggestion that might go a long way towards reassuring people in terms of disturbance. You know, you say your intention is not to disturb, for there not to be a public nuisance. I accept all of these things that you are saying. I therefore wonder, why not put an upper decibel limit that can be, discovered by coordinating with any person of that sort of technical expertise who could say this much will travel thus far, and then that might help the residents to be reassured. So it's a suggestion. My other question was where you said about it wasn't so it's about intention, I suppose. You say it again, your intention wouldn't be to have 200 events of, 80 events of 40, because it can only be half of them, for 200. Again, why not sort of give some more defined limits on those? Do you see, you were saying, there would probably be somewhere there was 20 and they were there from 12 until 5. And I'm not expecting you to say, well, you're going to map all of those out. But if you really don't feel there would be 40 at 100 and another 40 at one, however many the other one is, 200, then 100. Why not again spell that out a little more as a reassurance?
We felt that that was a proportionate and fair level. I appreciate you may not agree, but we felt that that was a fair way to put it forward.
It was that you were saying that it wouldn't be your intention to hit those upper limits, that and it's about how do you reassure residents by saying, well, actually, if we're never going to intend to be that many at that number, why not set out a different set of objectives for yourselves then?
I mean, sorry, I'm only repeating the point, not necessarily particularly helpfully, but we believe that that's a fair, appropriate, legitimate condition. The going into granular detail for 2 years' time to that extent, we didn't think that that was necessary. I appreciate you disagree, but that's the straight answer.
I just say that I don't think normally in licenses we'd go into that much detail, Alex, would we? Not normally.
I mean, it would be difficult. I would just remind everybody that were we to impose conditions other than those volunteered or offered by the applicant, which as a matter of principle do tend to generally get accepted, we would need, the committee would need to know that they were appropriate, necessary to promote the licensing objectives, and they were evidence-based. So if there were issues, potentially, yes, a condition could be imposed which said those kind of things, but there would need to be evidence that it met those criteria.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, sir.
Question for the applicant, Mr. Phipps. And forgive me if I didn't quite nail the point you made. I think when you said, and I appreciate the clarity that you did with one of my neighbours, the integrity and reputation of the applicant in this case is critical. I think you said to the application, a very important point. One moment, please. And I think, and this is where I may be a little bit mistaken, I think you used the words, we're not fly-by-night or cowboys. I think were the words you used. And if I didn't use those words, if you didn't use those, I apologize. I had a question for you. Do you think that this fly-by-nights or cowboys could be defined if, for instance, they were being threatened with enforcement action by this council or indeed an injunction?
No, you don't have to answer that, Mr. Phipps. I'm going to say this one more time, ladies and gentlemen. We are not talking about planning.
I didn't mention planning with respect.
Oh, yes, you did.
I didn't.
Enforcement powers, whether they be licensing enforcement, environmental protection enforcement, those are not for this committee. Those are for once a license has been granted and there is evidence that it's been breached.
With respect, I did not ask about planning. I asked a definition about cowboys and fly-by-nights, volunteered one, and wanted to understand the applicant's response.
Yeah,
is that fair?
I do not think that's appropriate for this hearing, sir.
And the chair?
I think we're digressing from the point, really, and I don't think that's the material fact that's going to make any difference.
Chair, to be fair, there were a couple of points that didn't touch on planning. It's fair that I answer those as they were put to me. I certainly think that the nature of who the applicant is in front of you is a legitimate consideration. If I said the word critical or not, candidly, I don't recall. But is it a legitimate consideration? Absolutely. And so I don't think there's any way past that. I think I did, in my explanation of cowboy and fly-by-night, actually finish with the words nightclub operator, which, as I said it, I was embarrassed, having acted for nightclub operators in the past. So I'm grateful to you for dropping that part from the question.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions of the applicant at this time? You will get a further chance, I think. No, you won't. Yes. So we'll move on now to the objectors to submit their objections. Responsible authorities, there aren't any. Other persons will go in order I've got here. We'll start with Ian. If you could avoid repetition, I know that's not easy to say, but we could start with Ian Stewart, Fotheringham.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. If I can. I'm not going to touch on the written responses that the community made to the most recent written representation by the applicant, namely supplement 6, I think it was, but I hope you may have had an opportunity to read it. So I'm not going to rehearse those points in exhaustive detail. You'll be probably relieved to hear. However, the local community in Farley Hungerford is very strongly opposed to Bath Rugby's plans for a new wedding and events business at Farley House, and I'd like to outline the two main reasons why this is. Firstly, the noise that would be generated by such large-scale events in such a quiet environment would create a significant public nuisance and disturbance. It's normally very still and silent late at night in Farley Hungerford. It's so quiet that you can hear an owl hooting several fields away. So the thud of the bass from amplified music only 300 meters away every time there's a wedding would cause a significant disturbance to the people living in the hamlet. Added to that would be the noise created by the huge volume of traffic, which would unavoidably be generated by each event. And I appreciate that traffic on the road network is not deemed relevant here. However, there would be a convoy of up to 200 people arriving at the property, the licensed premises, the site, all at once each time. Plus the noise from the crowd of people at the events themselves, many of whom will have been drinking for a number of hours, Also, the noise that would be created by taxi pickup after the event, some of which would likely be from straight outside our house. All of this noise would be very audible to the houses nearby, especially late at night. If it were allowed to go ahead, it would change the character of the hamlet very significantly. Secondly, we have significant concerns about the extent to which Bath Rugby would act with genuine consideration for local residents if they were granted a licence, especially when they would be financially incentivised to prioritise keeping their customers happy. There's quite a history of Bath Rugby, excuse me. There's quite a history of Bath Rugby breaching existing conditions and failing to show consideration for their neighbours. For example, numerous instances of breaching the authorised training hours, also using a loud air horn hooter during training, which they carried on with despite objections from the neighbourhood until Richard Keithhill, who was here previously the environmental health officer, eventually had to step in to order them to stop using it. They haven't shown themselves to be particularly community-minded about the way in which they've approached the licensing application process either. They failed to engage in any consultation with local residents about a new wedding and events business prior to making the application. All they told us was that the club would soon be applying for a license in order to formalise what we are already doing, and I quote, when of course we now know that it's actually to support their plan for a large new commercial venture at Farley House that would have a major impact on the community. Neither have Bath Rugby shown much respect for the local authorities' due process. Their events website has been live since April, and they've already been taking event bookings, including bookings for more than one wedding, even before applying for the licence. These things put together give the strong impression of a big, well-known rugby club that seems to think that it is above the rules and that they don't apply to them, and that the neighbourhood of which they should be a part doesn't particularly matter. Bath Rugby's application is very contrary to the understanding on which they came into the community, which was for a restricted use on a closed site by a professional rugby team for use as a training facility and headquarters, also a limited use for small corporate events on weekdays. They've applied for an incredibly wide-ranging licence which would open up the site to the general public on a commercial basis, on a significant scale, and they say on their website, at our licensed venue, anything goes. If it were granted, it would literally be giving them licence to act in a way in which no one would be happy for their neighbours to behave, having loud parties broadly whenever they feel like, with music blaring outdoors late at night, which has a significant chance of keeping their neighbours awake. Bath Rugby has shown limited concern for mitigating in an authentic way the significant issues that their new business would cause. Very late in the process, they've put forward a number of suggestions, but they're not proposals that would properly address or adequately mitigate the major issues it would throw up for the community. We as a community feel strongly that this application would be extremely damaging to the neighbourhood, and we urge you please to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. We'll do all the speakers before we ask questions. John Davidson.
That's me. The applicant has today said quite a bit along the lines of a lot of the objections have been conjecture and worst case, but I would like to just run you through some evidence-based examples of why the residents feel that way in their experience with living with Bath Rugby over the last 12 years. And and I will mention traffic, but I'm not mentioning traffic in terms of this application. I'm mentioning it in terms of the noise management plan and the traffic management plan in Bath Rugby's past history of not managing a lot of events very similar to that. So The committee will have read all the objections and you will know the strength of feeling on the grounds of both noise and traffic already created by activities at Farley House. These concerns are based on two aspects. The residents' very real experience of living with Bath Rugby noise and traffic issues over the past 12 years. And then two, the ineffectual, half-hearted and non-proactive way these issues have been treated to date by Bath Rugby. The committee will inevitably make a judgment on these issues based on both the residents' submissions and on what Bath Rugby have put in their application to mitigate these concerns in terms of their two plans. However, I would urge the committee to review the management measures in the current application in the context of the residents' real evidence-based experience over the last 12 years with Bath Rugby's ineffectual management of very similar issues. In terms of what the residents have already experienced from noise and traffic at the licensable site, these have been raised both directly with Bath Rugby via emails and regular 3-monthly meetings, and also to Environmental Health over these years. I have some examples here in writing if you wanted to take them, but it's maybe not appropriate. But so that's just a small sample. And there's one of these includes a noise complaint about a wedding held at Farley House in the location of this current application. They also cover traffic issues and planning breaches, as Ian has already mentioned. So the following is a direct quote from the response we received from Bath Rugby regarding the noise complaint for a wedding in July 2016. Apologies for the inconvenience you suffered on Saturday night due to the noise. We actually did quite a lot of planning to make sure that the event did not disturb you, including siting the marquee the other side of Castle Court and insisting that the majority of guests arrive by coach. Clearly, our planning was not up to scratch, and I was not informed that music would be playing until 1 a.m. So I really hope the committee can see the similarity with that and why the residents are not treating worst cases. They're treating it as things they've already experienced through hard evidence. The residents have tried working with Bath Rugby to address these issues, but the response of Bath Rugby has been half-hearted, to say the least. They express concern, but our experience is that actions and procedures they say they have put in place are largely not followed through. History has shown that they are not proactive at all in managing the traffic and noise situations. They may put forward plans, but they are not actively managed, and the key there is active. They will react to things, but the residents have constantly got to be reporting and talking. So for some examples here, they have hours and days of use and planning conditions for their pitches, such as not using them on bank holidays, which they have been breached on many occasions. For example,
I'm sorry, Mr. Davidson, you seem to be straying into planning there. Can we stay away from what the planning conditions are, please?
but this is okay.
No, thank you.
It's okay. So that they have video surveillance on the entry and exit roads to the licensable area, but there's no proactive monitoring of traffic issues, with the residents told that if they can provide a car number, they'll investigate the issue. It's again left the residents to police these traffic issues. An auto speed watch camera was promised on the lanes 18 months ago in order to weed out the worst offenders leaving the licensable area. That's not been installed.
Mr. Davidson, sorry, I'm going to have to stop you again. As I've already stated, speeding and traffic management of the roads away from the immediate vicinity of the premises is not something this licensing committee can consider or should be hearing about.
Okay, but
okay,
that's
thank you.
Leaving the licensable area. The current users, I'll just check that I'm not going to breach anything else. The current users of the access to Farley House are mainly players and employees. Bath Rugby should have some leverage over these users and ability to impose sanctions for breaches, as these users are an employer of Bath Rugby. However, what the residents have witnessed is that outside this group, Bath Rugby have little or no control over non-Bath Rugby staff, such as delivery drivers, coach drivers, taxis, who just seem to do as they please, with little or no ability to control them. The residents are concerned because This is the sort of user plus similar one-time visitors to the events that the current application will bring to the licensable site. And history has shown that Bath Rugby have not been able to effectively control and manage the behaviour of these categories of individuals visiting Farley House. Okay, I'll miss this one out because it talks about signs on the road. Oh yeah, so the applicant mentioned the use of what 3 words. So a long-standing issue about accessing the licensable site has been a problem from day one. Drivers following sat-nav directions in preference to any pre-advised correct routes or signs to the site. This is particularly true for commercial delivery vehicles or taxis. The use of what 3 words referenced in the application is not a solution to this problem. What 3 words simply provide...
Mr. Davidson, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop you again.
Okay.
People's sat-navs not knowing where the property is not within the applicant's control, and it's not reasonable to expect them an application to be determined on the basis that it can't. You've seen what they're proposing in terms of the traffic at the actual premises. Can you please refine your define? Let me try again. Can you please limit your representations to that? What happens on the wider network and the behaviour of drivers not on site?
Okay. No, the point I was just making is what 3 words doesn't provide directions. It just provides a location. Based on past experience of the last 12 years of Bath Rugby's ability and inclination to proactively manage the issues of noise and traffic from the use of Farley House, the residents are very sceptical that the measures stated in the licence application and management plans will be properly managed and implemented by Bath Rugby. And we left the residents again to report breaches and lack of management of noise and issues. I think I've probably said all that I can really in terms of, I just want to just emphasise that, you know, a lot of the stuff that has been said by the applicant's advisor is suggesting that it's all conjecture in the worst case scenarios, but we have lived with this, with issues of noise for many years.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Simon Hill.
I'm not going to speak. I think Katrina's missing.
I think Katrina's lowered down the speakers. So Simon, if you're not going to speak, go on to Rex.
I just want to say it. I had actually stated to Debbie that I would only interject with comments and not actually be a major speaker.
That's splendid. That's really helpful. Thank you, Rex. Mike Smith.
Mr. Chairman, I'd actually prepared just a very, very short piece as a sort of summary, closing remarks. I don't know whether you will be having a slot for that. You inferred on the agenda that there might be a slot for the applicants and the responders for that. It's very brief, but it is a sort of...
There is a summing up from objectors later on.
So should I reserve it?
Summing up.
It's very brief, but...
Mr. Smith, I would say if you have something you want to tell the committee, tell them now, because you can't use the summing up to introduce stuff they haven't heard already.
No, I wouldn't be doing that.
You know, so you've got nothing else that you want to say in terms of submission?
No, it's a summing up.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Deborah Allen, who I believe is online.
No comments from me, thank you very much. I'd just like to support what my fellow residents and neighbours have already said. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deborah. Robin.
Yeah, absolutely the same. No comment at this stage, just supporting the comments already made.
Thank you. Claire Hill.
I believe Claire has had to leave the meeting, so she's probably not here now.
So I guess that applies to Jeremy Hill as well. Okay.
They're on an airplane. They would have been here, but they're actually in flight at the moment.
Well, I would have thought they could have rearranged, but Katrina Murfitt.
Good afternoon. I am going to don my tin hat and beg the indulgence of both this committee and of Alice, because I'm going to mention the dreaded P word. But I'm going to do so within very confined parameters. The references to the P word, planning, within the legislation that binds this committee. And I'm perfectly well aware that I will be teaching my granny how to suck eggs in the case of the legal advisor, because she will be well aware of it, as will the committee to varying degrees. But there are some points which do arise from the legislation which I feel bound to draw this committee's attention to. And therefore, if I mention the dreaded P word, I hope it won't be an immediate guillotine. But I've prepared the relevant statutory authorities for the benefit of the committee, should it be helpful, highlighting the passages that I'm going to be referring to. It's all publicly available information on the web, all right? So if they wish to follow it, or perhaps consider it when they retire, it's available, okay?
Okay, I don't think we can allow any introduced documentation.
To be perfectly honest, it's available to you on your laptops because it's all, the URLs are all there. It's in the public domain.
Yeah, we are aware of the guidance and the statement of licensing policy council.
So I noticed that Phil Wake began his summary to the committee in paragraph 4 by stating that there have been concerns and points raised in relation to planning, but these would be deemed not relevant as Planning and Licensing Act independently of each other, and that it's not the responsibility of the premises to ensure they are compliant with both licensing and planning conditions, and no representations have been made by a responsible authority. I do not seek to depart from his suggestion that planning and licensing can and do act independently of each other. But I would say, based upon what the statute informs us, it's incorrect to say that the licensing committee must thereby deem all concerns or points raised in relation to planning as irrelevant. This is why, and I'm going to draw your attention to the 3 points in the legislation that say why that is so. So Phil, again, has quite rightly drawn your attention to, apart from the 4 licensing objectives, the 3 things you must take into account. The Licensing Act of 2003 and its subsequent amendments. The statutory guidance under section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003 and Somerset Council's statement of licensing policy. Just pausing on the policy point, you will be aware that Somerset at the moment only have a draft policy. That draft was the only policy available to respondents prior to the deadline. We now know that because that has yet to be ratified, it's the MNDIP licensing policy, which is the current one at the moment. In addition to the Licensing Act itself, there is the post-legislative scrutiny by the House of Lords in their select committee of that legislation, which I've again copied if you don't have a copy available, published in 2017, and that of course led on to the statutory guidance which has been issued under section 182 of the Licensing Act of 2003, published in it was published in December 2022 and has been updated to the 12th of January this year. And again, I have made those available to you. And in particular, I've just, I haven't given you the whole statute. There is a certain amount of overload if I were to do so. I have concentrated simply upon those passages that inform your powers in dealing with matters and the peripheral extent to which planning may impact upon that. So what does MNDIP's legacy policy tell us? Paragraph 3.4.5.4 states that non-compliance with other statutory requirements may be taken into account in reaching a decision about whether or not to grant or vary a licence, but only if relevant representations are received. So that's permissory in its language. Paragraph 3.5.5 of the current policy also goes on to say that the licensing authority shall expect applicants to have obtained appropriate consents or licenses prior to application. And insofar as it's relevant, Somerset's draft policy at the moment says much the same thing, although it adds a reminder in particular for applicants to ensure the appropriate form of planning is in place. So I turn next to the meaning of relevant representations, which is something that is mentioned in Phil Wake's advice to you. Of course, the licensing policy has a glossary to tell us what various terms mean. Relevant representations isn't one of them, but that is not the end of the matter because the Licensing Act itself does. Section 18(6) to 7 of the Licensing Act 2003 is headed Determination of Application for Premises Licence, and it expressly states that the meaning of relevant representations includes representations made by a responsible authority or other person. And whilst Phil Wake says that no representations have been made by any responsible authority, it would be an error, therefore, to exclude representations to made by anyone other than a responsible authority. We are aware that Mr. Andrew Deering of the Council's Planning Enforcement Department has discussed and sent in his written comments. He has told us so. He's advised residents that the investigation is underway. He's given us the reference number, ENF.
I appreciate where you're going, and I think I know why you're doing it.
Yes.
But I will just state again, the matters for this licensing subcommittee to determine are whether or not this application will promote or undermine the licensing objectives.
I don't dispute
investigations by the planning enforcement team, possible breaches of condition are not.
That is
not
for you to resolve. I absolutely agree. But to say that you must not take it into account and that it's completely irrelevant and that you must close your ears is failing in your democratic duty, where the statute tells you how you are to perform the exercise. That's why I'm drawing attention to the statutory provisions. All right. And they are clear in their language in saying that they may be taken into account in reaching a decision about whether or not to grant or vary a licence. All right. I think it's my duty just to draw attention to those matters because you have been very emphatic that any mention of the P word must be guillotined. And I think that's a wrong interpretation. And I'm not going to bend your ear for hours on this topic. And yes, I have 40 years of experience as a legal professional, so I do understand where irrelevance sends everyone to sleep. I am going to stay on topic and only refer to the guidance that has been published. All right. So, as to representations made by a responsible authority, of course, that would include the planning officer, were those to be before the committee. I understand they have been excluded for reasons which are not within my knowledge, but I know that they exist. Potentially, I think the parish council could be considered by the ordinary man in the street a responsible authority as well, and therefore they come without that definition too. Not only are the licensing committee entitled to expect that the applicant should have obtained appropriate consents prior to making their application, as paragraph 3.5.5 says, it reminds them that where they haven't done so, they will be liable to enforcement action under the appropriate legislation. We know that. The post-legislative scrutiny that I referred to by the House of Lords of this very topic had this to say. It highlighted the difficulty caused by the separation between licensing and planning and identified numerous examples of the absurdities caused by the separation of the systems, especially for applicants for new premises, which need permission for both planning and licensing, and for whom permission for one without the other is of no use. It acknowledged the confusion for residents, where a lack of coordination between licensing and planning results in the grant of a license where planning it goes on to be refused. They noted the authorities where there is already good collaboration between licensing and planning officers and concluded with this recommendation. Coordination between licensing and planning systems can and should begin immediately in all local authorities. The Section 182 guidance should be amended to make clear that the licensing committee, far from ignoring any relevant decision already
I'm sorry,
taken,
Councillor.
should take it into account.
I'm sorry, Councillor. You know, because you are, I'm sure you are aware as a legal professional, the comments of the select committee are not binding on this
Indeed,
council.
you're right. What they are binding upon is the legislation that had to ensue. And I come on to deal with that, which is the
If you'd like
revised
to talk
guidance.
about the Section 182 guidance, you're very welcome to, but I'm not sure
Okay.
what help.
Well, that
going
is the
through what
background.
select committee
All right.
said is.
It's the background to the Section 182 guidance issued by the government relevant to the Licensing Act. It recommends at paragraph 14.64 that statements of licensing policy should provide clear indications of how the licensing authority will secure the proper integration of its licensing policy with, amongst other agencies, planning, adding that many of these strategies are not directly related to the promotion of the licensing objective, but indirectly impact on them.
You still seem to be talking about the select committee, Councillor.
No, I'm talking about the government guidance.
I'm asking you to move on from the select committee comments, please.
I am.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So, sorry, perhaps I should have made it clear. What I have just read out comes from the revised guidance issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003, issued in December 2022 and updated on the 12th of January this year. All right. Paragraph 14.64 of that document goes on to explain that planning permission, building control approval and licensing regimes will be properly separated to avoid duplication and inefficiency, but it adds, however, as set out in Chapter 9, licensing committees and officers should consider discussions with their planning counterparts prior to determination. with the aim of agreeing mutually acceptable operating hours and scheme designs. Whilst paragraph 14.65 reminds applicants that premises operating in breach of planning permission would be liable to prosecution under planning law. And it then continues by advising that proper integration should be assured by licensing committees where appropriate, providing regular reports to the planning committee. So I conclude with these 5 bullet points. The concerns raised by the parish council and the residents regarding planning restrictions are relevant. Paragraph 3.5.4 of the current licensing policy gives power to this committee in reaching its decision whether or not to grant a licence to take into account the applicant's non-compliance with other statutory requirements, since relevant representations to that effect have been received. Paragraph 3.5.5 and .6 of the licensing policy expressly reminds the applicants, as I've said, of their need to regularise planning consent prior to making the application. So the licensing committee can and should weigh in the balance the fact that enforcement proceedings are both undesirable and unnecessary as a drain on public resources. And that might lead them to the conclusion that this application be refused until the applicants have regularised their planning position in a way which is congruent with the activities for which they seek a licence. And I would conclude by saying, by taking account of the legislative provisions that I have brought to your attention, you will be acting consistently both with the government guidance under section 182, the Licensing Act, and promoting the policies and strategies which were detailed in the House of Lords Select Committee and will fall for consideration when Somerset's own draft policy comes to be ratified later next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Catriona Murfitt. I was going to put a Spanish start on my Catriona there. I don't know why. Councillor Barbie Land.
I have nothing further to say.
Great, thanks, Barbie. We've got 3 other speakers who registered, so move on to them. Tarquin MacDonald.
So no, Tarquin and Paul are the applicants. We are here, but it's not proposed they're going to.
Adam Boyden, I think you've got something to say, Adam.
Oh, hello there. Thank you. I did miss some of this meeting, I'm afraid, for the other duties. I'd like to thank Catriona Murfitt there for that excellent discussion. My concerns are largely related to the lack of noise impact assessment, lack of a quantified assessment of the likely noise levels emanating from the site for music at certain times of the night, and the lack of an assessment of the likely decibel levels to be experienced by residents in various places external to the site, including from music and including from road traffic generated by the site, the licence activities past their houses. That's my main concern, is that we don't have a quantitative assessment of that. So everything else is a qualitative argument, I'm afraid. Where the applicants say that it won't be a problem and the residents say that it probably will be, because they're very concerned about their living conditions and their likelihood of getting sleep during a licensed event. So that's my main concerns. If there was a noise impact assessment, I think we probably wouldn't be here so long. But I would have liked the applicants to have submitted a noise impact assessment, so that could be assessed by the Environmental Protection Team and the residents and the Parish Council. One has not been submitted to my knowledge. I think that's not very difficult to arrange. So I would ideally have liked the application to have been withdrawn and then resubmitted with an assessment. And on that basis, I would recommend refusal for this application on the likelihood of public nuisance. I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Right, we'll move now to questions of the objectors. If there are any questions from the subcommittee, Connor?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Lance?
No, thank you, Chair. No questions.
Thank you. Do the applicants have any questions of the objectors?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Jack?
It's just really something to raise, just as a matter of clarity, really. The application was consulted upon, as is required by statute, and it was consulted on for 28 days, and it was sent to all responsible authorities. One of the responsible authorities was planning, Planning responded to us saying planning have no objection to the proposal under the 4 permitted licensing grounds. Planning is separately engaging with planning agent for Farley House under planning legislation concerning what we believe to be material change in the use of buildings.
Thank you, Jack. Any other questions of the objectors? No, thank you. We have to consider also comments from parties not at the meeting who have submitted objections. We'll have had those already. So hopefully everybody has read them and considered them, and we don't have to go through them all. Thank you. Okay, we now move on to summing up. As it is a summing up, if we could keep it brief, if possible. I'm not going to restrict you. So first of all, it is the objectors if they wish to sum up or add anything further to what's been said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I will be very brief. So these are closing remarks. Mr. Chairman, committee members, you have read and heard the many serious concerns and arguments raised by the residents of this small rural hamlet of Farley Hungerford today and over the last few weeks, which are objecting unanimously to this application from Bath Rugby for a premises licence, which, as it stands, and even with the slight modifications suggested, would have far-reaching, almost unlimited permission to hold large weddings, parties, promotional and other events at Farley House, with all the public nuisance and disturbance and potential, public safety issues which that would entail. Potentially, again, 365 days per year, but that appears it may be limited slightly. Clearly, there's no need to reiterate those concerns when summing up. I can assure you this has caused a huge amount of unrest and stress in the village over the last few weeks, and it's felt like a real David and Goliath scenario. Bath Rugby, with all their power and near unlimited resources, have, we believe, attempted a clever ploy of gaining permission to totally change the permitted use of Farley House by applying for this licence, flying in the face of all the conditions already imposed on them in previous, planning applications. And the most important element of those conditions is the same for every single one over the last few years, and that is, quotes, to safeguard the living conditions for occupants of neighbouring properties. So, Mr. Chairman of Committee, finally, and taking into consideration everything that's been said, particularly Katrina's presentation, once again, we implore you please to consider the wider picture here and decline this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your summing up. I'll now ask the applicant if they wish to sum up.
Just briefly, this is a legitimate application, and the passion with which the representatives address you and the comments that they have made can't detract from that. One of the comments made early on was about music blaring outdoors late at night. That perhaps is just the easiest way to articulate the difference between ourselves and the residents who have objected. That is not a reasonable proposition for how activities will be conducted at these premises. And frankly, if they were, it would be a pretty short-lived experience all round. The environmental health officer who attended today makes a number of, I thought, very important and interesting observations. First of all, he doesn't serve a representation in connection with the application. Then he considers that the noise management plan is excellent and has his support. He confirms that the definition of indoors, nothing to do with acoustic treatment. Confirms that marquees are self-evidently less acoustically retaining than a property, or in the example I gave him, a basement bunker. And he specifically confirms that it was not his consideration that an acoustic report was necessary or proportionate, and that he advised accordingly. None of the responsible authorities serve a representation, which does not in any way undermine the representation served by residents, but it's informative and it goes into your deliberations. And you look then at the issue of relevant representations, which was touched on at some length in the planning address. Relevant, and your legal officer will advise you on the guidance, of course, and the licensing policy. But effectively, a relevant representation is a representation that attends to the relevant issues. And so the degree to which, as I have positioned it, and I grant you it's how I've positioned it, that every conceivable risk, anxiety, concern, scenario, potential, which are, some of which are words that are expressly and specifically used within the representations, does not allow for the reasonable conclusion that those will transpire. There's a number of materials in front of you. I would ask you respectfully just to have a little look at the written submissions. I know you already will have done, but they attend to a number of these points. And without in any way drawing the fire of your legal advisor, I do want to just make some passing reference to planning. Your office's report sets it out very clearly as to what is and isn't legitimately considered. You have the comments of your legal advisor at the outset of the hearing, and if I may say so, on a number of occasions through the course of the hearing. You have the MENDIT licensing policy, which is, as was very fairly pointed out, the governing policy until there is a combined Somerset policy, but it would seem that that's likely to be fairly similar. So going back to the point about relevant representations, those points that attend to planning, I say, are not relevant. But I will make the point that the reliance repeatedly over and over and over again on planning from the residents may be something that you will consider, because it perhaps discloses the residents' own thoughts about the merits of the case in a licensing context, because everybody understood from the minute we walked in this morning what the legal officer's view on the planning and what your advice would be and what your policy says and what the officer's report says. So I leave that with you. You may be against me on that. It's not a particularly big point. But all of those repeated submissions are predicated by the representors on the basis that we are in some way in breach of our planning. We simply don't accept that point. So the high watermark of the representations, relevant or irrelevant, but respectfully, the whole of the submission, the oral submission on the planning point and the House of Lords Select Committee and potential amendments to the guidance or otherwise, presupposes a breach of planning. We're not trading, we haven't got a license, can't be in breach. And we don't accept, to be very clear, that were we, had we been, that we would in any way be in breach. And I appreciate that that then is irrelevant, but it needed to be said, and thank you for extending me the courtesy of making the point. The councillor made the point just at the end that everything else is a qualitative argument. Yes, exactly right. That's what happens in licensing committees. That's how licensing committees are determined. You will come to weigh in the balance everything that you have seen and heard and make a judgment as to where that balance, on a balance of probabilities, fairly falls. And that is only based on the 4 licensing objectives. I am discounting public safety, as I cannot see that the public safety points are fairly made, and I take some support for that from the comments the legal advisor made at the start of the day. The protection of children from harm, I say the service of the representations by a 7- and 10-year-old and the photos of the scooters on the street is illustrative of the sensitivity of the representations rather than a point that could fairly be said to be particularly legitimate today. The protection of children, the prevention of crime and disorder, the police engagement or lack thereof in terms of that element, I say, is conclusive, and I've given you the national guidance paragraph. And so we fall down to public nuisance, and we fall down to noise. I'm afraid, sure, that audible cars travelling on the national rail network could fairly be said to be a public nuisance. What did I say?
Rail network.
A rail network. No, no. I've made a few, words have popped out the wrong way, but not on the rail network. And so far as I'm aware, that's not a feature of everyone will be relieved to know that's not a feature of this application. But on the road network, but you will see that we have attended to issues of traffic and transport, and we've drawn together a plan and a proposal. And when you factor in all of the additional conditions and measures, we say it's candidly very difficult to see that the public nuisance threshold could be reached simply by attendees at this location. And then there is the issue of the entertainment noise. The mere operation of entertainment does not fairly allow for the conclusion that the licensing objective will be undermined. We will need to monitor it. We will need to be on top of it. We will need to play it at the correct level. We will need to do checks at the perimeter. We will need to have a complaint line. We will need to investigate those complaints. That's the noise management plan. And I suppose the final point to make is, based on both the written representation, but if I may say so, the attendance today, it is inconceivable that this premises will not be very, very closely supervised and monitored, no doubt by environmental health in the fullness of time, but by those who live in proximity, neighbours, residents, the village more generally. And so we know that we need to be, if you forgive the phrase, on our best behaviour here. And on that basis, qualitative judgment or not, perfectly legitimate to grant the application. I just make one tiny observation. I did, in passing, I think your legal officer took a note, just make the point about the noise management plan, traffic management plan not being changed without the express consent of the authority, or words to that effect. Probably could and should have been a feature. And yeah, you've heard my other comments.
Thank you. Mr. Phipps? Licensing officer, do you have anything to say?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will go on to the summing up part. So the decision-making process. The subcommittee must consider this application on its own merits and from the information contained within this application and this report. Members are reminded that the duty of the licensing authority is to take steps necessary to promote the licensing objectives in the interest of the wider community. The licensing objectives as follows: prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, prevention of public nuisance, and protection of children from harm. In its decision-making process, the licensing subcommittee must have regard to the Licensing Act 2003 and subsequent amendments, the statutory guidance issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003, and Somerset Council's statement of licensing policy. As touched on previously, this is the MENDIPS policy that is transitioned into the new authority. The options available to the committee are as follows: grant the applications with no modifications and only attach conditions as required by the 2003 Act. These shall include mandatory conditions and conditions consistent with the operating schedule. Grant the application, modify to such an extent as the licensing authority considers appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives, or refuse the application, giving reasons for its decision. Subcommittee, should the committee be mindful to attach conditions to the license, they must only do so if they are appropriate, necessary and proportionate, precise, clear and unambiguous, practical, realistic and enforceable, non-duplicative of existing statutory requirements or offences, modern and fit for purpose. Consideration must also be given to the number of conditions being attached. The licensing authority recognises that most licence holders seek to follow the law, and any enforcement action will normally follow a graduated approach, and in the first instance will include education and support. Where licence holders continue to flout the law or act irresponsibly, firmer action will be taken. Right of appeal. All relevant parties to the decision of this licensing authority have the right of appeal to Magistrates Court in connection with this matter. This must be done within 21 days of being notified in writing of the relevant decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, everyone. I suppose it's the nature of Mr. Phipps' profession that he took longer in summing up than the objectors, but we'll accept that. And if only my town stroke village was on the rail network, but it's not. And thank you to those who didn't speak unnecessarily, because that did prevent it being a very long meeting. Now, we did have a 9-hour hearing, which I think Mr. Phipps was in attendance at that one as well, during COVID, which was via Teams. I would like to say at home that I didn't get up and make a cup of tea during the meeting, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't. Anyway, thank you so much for coming today. Now, normally we'd retire to make our decision and then hopefully bring you a decision today. However, as we, in view of the time, and we have another hearing at 2 o'clock, we're going to use our power, which we often did at Mendip anyway, to notify everybody within 5 working days of our decision. But yet again, thank you all for attending. Thank you all for your contributions. And we'll let you know within 5 working days. Thank you very much. Hey.
I'm going to put my laptop in.
I was going flat, is it?
Thank you.
Thank you online as well. Yes. Sorry, I forgot you.